Hello, everyone. I'm Laura Greiner, your host for today's Swine podcast. Today I have with me Dan Columbus from the Prairie Swine Center. Dan, how are you today?
I'm doing good, thanks. How are you?
Good, good. Glad to have you on today. Dan, for our audience that may not know you, would you mind giving just a little bit of an introduction as to who you are?
Yeah, so I'm a research scientist at the Prairie Swine Center, where I focus on swine nutrition. And I'm also an adjunct professor at the University of Saskatchewan. A little bit of background, I'm originally from Sarnia, Ontario. So I have no farm background. Everything has come from the education, but originally started at Guelph, and like most students getting into animal biology, wanted to be a vet, but saw the error of my ways and ended up in swine nutrition with the 𝘗𝗶𝘃𝘂𝘵 lab at Guelph, and continued and did my master's and PhD with 𝘗𝗶𝘃. Afterwards, I moved down to Houston, Texas, of all places, to work with Dr. 𝘗𝗶𝘃𝘂𝘵 Davis, still working with pigs, but looking more at their use as a model for human health type research. And then 6 years ago, moved up to the Prairie Swine Center. And I've been here ever since.
Great, great. Yes, 𝘗𝗶𝘃𝘂𝘃𝘂𝘵 was a phenomenal professor and researcher. So you had some excellent training along the way.
Yeah, he was a great mentor. I wish he was still around.
Yes, absolutely. Well, so let's talk a little bit about then some of the work that you're currently doing. You mentioned briefly you're working with pigs as a model for human health. So we'll touch on that. We'll do that towards the end. So I want to start, I think, really with nutrient requirements and what you're doing in terms of understanding those requirements from a disease perspective. We continually have these discussions here, even in the United States, about what's the right requirement for disease status versus health status. So I'd be interested to hear your take on currently what you're seeing and doing.
Yeah, so a big part of my research program has been specifically looking at how nutrient requirements change with disease challenge, but also how the diet can impact a pig's response to disease and other stressors. This really came out from the move to ban antibiotics for both growth promotion a few years back. But it has developed more just because I think in general, we need to move more away from determining requirements for growth and focusing specifically on growth and how we need to feed the pig to enhance robustness and its ability to resist disease challenge or grow in that and really support their overall health. So we've done a couple of studies. It started off specifically looking at threonine requirements and disease challenge. We did an LPS model and also looked at dietary fiber. And this really came about as the fact that fiber can impact threonine requirements based on mucin production in the gut. And also threonine is really highly utilized by the immune system. So we thought that maybe that would have an even greater effect on threonine requirements during disease challenge. In that one, we actually saw that it didn't have an additive effect, and actually the fiber ended up having more of a protective effect, probably because of the increase in mucin production. So that was one surprising, but a good surprise. Since that study, we've done a lot more of looking at more enteric disease challenges, specifically salmonella, and how providing additional amino acids may be beneficial in those. So we've done one of those with threonine, and we showed that just providing excess threonine enhanced growth performance during that salmonella challenge. And more recently, we've been looking at more functional amino acids, specifically threonine, tryptophan, and methionine, which have been highly studied during disease challenge. So we provided those at 20% above NRC, and we got a further enhancement of growth performance in that situation. And then most recently, we looked at specifically the adaptation period. So a lot of these disease challenges, when we look at the requirements, it's right at the time we challenge them, or we switch the diet rate when we challenge them, but there was really no work looking at whether or not providing these in advance of the challenge had any greater benefit. And in our most recent study, we did show that the further up to 2 weeks in advance of the disease challenge actually had a greater impact on the enhanced growth performance and reduction in that immune activation. So some interesting stuff coming out and how we can impact this, but the overall goal is simply to provide one additional tool that we can use without those antibiotics that may be able to enhance pig health and pig growth and that enhance the bottom line for the producers, right?
Yeah, so what I'm hearing you talk about too is a lot of enteric disease challenge work. Are you doing anything with viral disease work? So even in the intestines, or are you focusing mainly on just bacterial?
Right now, we're focusing on the bacterial and like you said, the enteric challenges, because when we've done or other people have done work on this, and then we've actually recently provided a meta-analysis that shows that the enteric challenges seem to have the greatest impact on health and reduction in feed efficiency and changes in nutrient requirements compared to some of the other, say, respiratory challenges or that. So that's really why we've been focusing on that. And also we are doing our work mainly in nursery pigs, where gut health is already a challenge with the stress of weaning and getting nutrients to them. So that's really why we've looked at that. We haven't got into viral challenges in the gut, though, mainly because of just what we have available and the model that we have that works. So, and I think for a lot of these, right, it does tend to be E. coli. We're an outlier even kind of looking at salmonella, but it's working and it's showing us what we're hoping for.
So along those lines, you talk about diets affecting pig health. Are there some do's and don'ts that we should be thinking about, particularly in that nursery pig when we're formulating diets?
That part of it is still kind of in its infancy, at least from our point. I mean, we specifically looked at dietary fiber, and it was showing that potentially fiber may be more beneficial than what we originally thought, because it does have this anti-nutrient kind of connotation around it. So we may want to start looking at increasing dietary fiber in those diets as a means to enhance gut health. And I think more research is coming out about that, especially from the 𝘮𝘂𝘃𝘀 research station is showing, fiber may be actually beneficial in that nursery. The other thing I think it's talked about a lot is dietary protein content in those nursery diets and reducing dietary protein. We've looked a little bit at that and specifically looking at ways to keep protein the same, but maybe adding something to the diet that reduces its effect. So we specifically look at high protein, but then high fiber. So give those bugs and something else to focus on fermenting instead of the protein. So we had some success with that, but not a lot. I think more work needs to be done to really understand what's happening with the dietary protein story. I think it's not just a high and low protein, but there is more going on, whether that's the type of protein ingredient being used or the digestibility of the ingredient. I think we really need to start looking more and more into.
Yeah, I think that's the continual conversation. We used to talk about high protein diets and face of disease versus low protein diets. And it becomes confounding because, of course, when the pig is sick, it may not eat. And so do we increase the nutrient the nutrient content while the animal is ill, or do we, let that nutrient content stay low because the animal is addressing other issues? And you highlighted a key point. Certainly when the immune system is active, we know the amino acid requirements do change with an activated immune system. So again, are you doing anything on thinking about those types of requirements in the face of a disease challenge?
Yeah, definitely. I think that that's going to come up. We focused on amino acids specifically, but obviously energy is going to play a big role in that as well. And like you said, you brought up a good point. They eat less when they're sick, right? So you can make the argument they eat less, so they're not going to grow as much. So why would we adjust anything? But I think it's that those ratios for the requirements are likely going to change. And I think that's where we've seen it with the amino acids, where when we talk about ideal protein, it's specifically related to growth for the most part, right? And we can't assume that we're still feeding for growth in a sick pig. And so things like all the amino acid ratios to lysine, I think the lysine ratio to energy is likely going to change in those situations in order to support different processes within the animal.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So another thing that you're doing some work on, of course, would be some mycotoxins. And mycotoxins, of course, are something that we are dealing with more and more frequently. I would say in the 15 years that I've been formulating diets, we used to never talk about mycotoxins, and now it's rare not to talk about mycotoxins. So what's some of the work that you're currently doing with mycotoxins?
We actually recently, or over the last couple of years, have looked at specifically mycotoxins and deoxynivalenol in grower finisher pigs. And we went that route because a lot of work is done in the nursery phase and not very much in the older pigs. The other thing we wanted to do is look at it long term. So a lot of mycotoxin studies are done and they're over 3-4 weeks. And then you see if you have an effect or not, and then you move on. Whereas we really wanted to look at the long term. So 6 weeks to the one study we did was 11 weeks long that we were feeding these. And then we actually didn't look at any additive or anything to mitigate. We just wanted to see specifically if the pigs could adapt or adjust to having mycotoxins in the diet. So for that, we ran 2 studies. The first one was a finisher study, so starting at about 75 kilograms all the way to market. And then the second one was grower finisher, so 35 kilograms all the way to market. And the pigs received either a control diet or 1, 3, or 5 ppm DON in the diet, and they stayed on that diet the entire time. So we never took them off. They got DON the whole time. And what we found was, as expected, you know, when you first give DON, the intake will go down and growth performance goes down. But in both situations, after about 3 to 4 weeks, the intake recovers and the growth recovers, and then they're growing as you would expect. They never recover from that loss in body weight though. So when we marketed them, they were anywhere from 3 to, I think it was 8 kilos lighter than their control or 1 ppm counterparts. But at least the tool is there now, and the information is there, that if producers are like, well, I'm going to get this hit on performance, but if I could keep my pigs a week longer or whatever, then it might not be that bad. The one good thing is that we saw there was no effect in any of the pigs with 1 ppm DON. So at least when it comes to the requirements of kind of the maximum level, that seems to be justified. So it's really, you know, looking at above that 1 ppm and what adjustments you may need to make.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's a very good point. We've talked about that for many years, and particularly in sows, being able to tolerate a greater level of DON in particular compared to obviously a nursery pig or even a finisher hog. But I've heard that as well, that the pigs do seem to adjust. It's just a question of how much you're willing to give on that loss in particular, and then, you know, how long can we, from a welfare perspective, wait for the animals to eat and recover, right? So along with that, though, one of the things that we continue to hear in the United States is, well, it's not just DON or 𝘮𝘃toxin that comes into the grain. It's usually multiple metabolites and various versions of other mycotoxins. And so have you looked at any studies where you're bringing that in combination with maybe a 𝘵𝘮𝑖𝑛one or a fumonisin? And does that change that response?
We haven't specifically looked at that. Mycotoxin work is incredibly difficult to do when just trying to get one, especially when you're looking at naturally contaminated feed, let alone trying to get the levels of another one in there at the same time. I know there have been some work that's been done by other groups, and there does seem to be kind of a synergistic effect with some of these mycotoxins where you have multiple contaminations and they can further or cause a further reduction in performance or other effects that we necessarily didn't see with just DON alone. For instance, we didn't see basically the immune or health effects that we would have been expecting with just DON. So whether or not the previous studies that have seen that is because there was another mycotoxin present. The benefit is that, or I guess the one good news story is that some of these adsorbents and other mycotoxin mitigants seem to work against some of these other mycotoxins, whereas they don't with DON. So at least you might be able to add something to the diet that can maybe eliminate one half of your story. We specifically focused on DON because it is the most prevalent, and it does seem to be at the highest levels when to the point that you would have to do something in your diets versus some of the other mycotoxins, which happen a little bit more frequently and may not be at those high levels.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's a very good point. You know, we focus on DON because it impacts all phases of production equally, right? Even though the levels might be different from a nursery to a sow in terms of tolerance, it affects them equally. We generally don't get too concerned about 𝘵𝘮𝑖𝑛one in a nursery or in a finishing operation compared to in a sow operation. So I think obviously working on DON is a good starting point. And I'd be interested to hear what your work continues to show. I think there's a lot that we can do. Certainly years ago, we used to talk about how we maybe changed even some of our amino acids because of the response that 𝘮𝘃toxin elicits from a hormonal aspect within the brain, right? We changed the brain biochemistry. So should we change the amino acids that also influence that brain biochemistry? But I haven't seen a lot of work on that recently. So I think, you know, as you continue that work, I'd be excited to hear what you see.
Yeah, you bring up a good point too, right? With the changing and the requirements in that. And one of the things that we were wondering is if you know that the pigs are going to be eating less for a period of time, do you change the nutrient density of your diet to account for that? It would be interesting to get that work done. Maybe I can get money to do it in the future. But yeah, I think it's now that we have that information that they can adapt, how do we maybe minimize that effect?
Well, the last thing I promised that we'd come back to, of course, is talking about how you're using pigs as a model for human health. Can you share a little bit about what you're doing currently in that area?
Yeah, this obviously started with my postdoc work down in Houston, where we were looking at how specifically leucine can improve lean gain in low birth weight pigs. And so I've kind of taken that interest with me to prairie swine. And because it has that effect, low birth weight is not just a human health issue, right? This is also something that we're seeing more and more in swine production, and the increase in lower birth weight pigs with this increase in litter size. And how do we feed these pigs, or how do we support them so that we don't lose them, or that we can still get them to market. Specifically, one of the things that we've been looking at is trying to characterize those low birth weight pigs. And it's when it comes to the metabolome or even the proteome, right? So what is it that makes these pigs respond differently? Is it just they're small, so they're always going to grow slow? Or can we do something, find a target in there that maybe some signal isn't working as well as it does in a normal birth weight pig, and we can adjust the feed to account for that. So that's really where we're sitting at now. We've also collaborated with some other groups looking at cardiovascular function in low birth weight pigs who are either under or normal fed. And so we've looked at neural, so brain vascular blood flow and how that's affected, and overall cardiac function. And that's with groups both at Saskatchewan and Michigan State. And that really comes from the human health side, as an example, because we do find that low birth weight infants tend to grow into adults with an enhanced or an increased risk of cardiovascular disease, decreased cardiovascular function, exercise ability, and kind of all those. So how do we enhance that lifelong growth and health of humans as well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's what's intriguing to me, is that we do see, particularly in those low birth weight pigs, we tend to see almost a nutrient absorption deficiency, is what I'd like to call it. We can see those piglets, they're up at the sow's underlying, they're nursing aggressively. You would think that they would do well, but they just tend to struggle. And I haven't kept up on preemies and low birth weight infants, but do we see something along those lines in the gut of the piglet, or is that just something that I'm imagining?
That's what we're actually hoping to show in this. We've had some preliminary work where there did seem to be some reduction in nutrient transporter expression and enzyme, so digestive enzyme expression in the gut of these pigs related to birth weight, but also related to age. So we did see more significant differences in those, depending on whether we were testing weaning, at weaning or at the end of the nursery period, say. So we're not seeing the huge differences between the low birth weight and the normal birth weight, which is kind of indicating to us maybe more and more that as long as you can get the nutrients into them, you know, they're okay. But because they're smaller, you know, the just average daily gain is not going to ever be equivalent. One of the things we did find, because we also looked, so in this one study that we did, we looked at low birth weight and normal birth weight, and then we underfed them or full fed them with the sow. So we took half the pigs off the sow for 6 hours a day and then put them back on. So they were about a 25% reduction in feed intake. And it reduced their growth, but then as soon as we put them back into the nursery, they were, by the end of nursery, they were right back up to their normal fed counterparts. So it does seem to be maybe more that there's a physiological response going on, and that response to nutrient intake maybe more than just the supply of nutrients itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very interesting. I'll look forward to seeing more of your results, because you're right, it's an issue that we have to continue to address, and I don't think we all officially know the correct protocol on how to manage those low birth weight pigs, other than we just try to put them on a good sow and hope they get a good amount of milk consumption, right? That's
put them on a good sow, try to create feed, try to get the feed up in the nursery. Yeah, there's lots of strategies going on, but I think hopefully we find something, you know, related more to the physiology that allows us to maybe take a little bit more targeted approach in trying to instead of the shotgun, we'll just throw everything at them and see what works.
That's right. That's right. It would make my life much easier from a production standpoint if I can just say, this is what I need to do with that pig. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I do appreciate your time. And so as we wrap up kind of our conversation here, there are a couple of key points that you would like our audience to think about or remember from our discussion today about some of your work.
I think the biggest thing is related to health and nutrient requirements is that, you know, we focus a lot on growth, and that's where all the nutrient requirements have come from. But I think we really need to start looking at what are the other aspects of that go into developing a nutrient requirement, and specifically looking at maybe the requirements for some of those non-growth functions, and just allow the pig to express more fully gut development, health, and everything. And so they're just that much more robust. So I think beyond growth would be my biggest take-home message.
That's a very good take-home message. I like that one. Well, so as you know, we tend to wrap up our podcast with a couple of key questions that we ask all of our guest speakers. So the first one I'd like to ask you is, what is your favorite swine resource book?
I think for me, it's maybe too common, but NRC is the biggest one for me. And that's just because we are, constantly testing those requirements and how they can change and everything. So I think it's a good starting point, but also a good point to bring where does research need to go to maybe fill in those gaps. A little bit less of a technical one would probably be the amino acids by 𝘬𝘮𝘂, and that's because I'm an amino acid nerd. So I really like knowing about what they're doing and the metabolism and how, what influence they have, again, beyond growth, right? So I think those would be my two favorites.
Well, we also like to expand our minds in ways outside of our profession, of course. And so are there any books that you're reading or recently have read that are not swine related that you'd like to share with the audience?
So more recently, I think one of the interesting ones would be Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. And that's really about why certain people succeed and succeed really, really well in some instances, and kind of what goes into that. There's some surprising things that come in. There tends to be a little bit more luck than we like to think, but also some other kind of suggestions for hard work and everything can get you there too. So I think that one's really good.
I think I actually do have Outliers on my shelf. We have used that one here in the house before. So the last question I have is, when you think about people who are successful in your profession, what characteristics stand out to you in your mind?
I think the biggest one is constantly questioning what may be considered dogma and trying new things. So in a couple words, be a disruptor. Don't just accept that something is the way it is, and question it and come up with the weird and the what some people might think is crazy and not worth studying. And I think that's really one of the key aspects to how to really be successful in this.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Well, Dan, I appreciate your time today. It was a pleasure visiting with you.
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity.
And for everyone on our listening group, this is Dan Columbus from Prairie Swine Center. So again, thank you and have a great day.
Imagine if, with a few key concepts, you could have the potential to create a massive positive impact by bringing from hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars for swine producers. Join us on this small group and go to the next level of swine nutrition on this 7-week-long elite online training in applied swine nutrition and feeding by myself and my world-class invited speakers. Additionally, you enjoy an exclusive community to exchange ideas. Go now to www.eliteswinenutritionist.com.